With massive layoffs in nearly every sector, weakness in manufacturing, car sales and housing, and the biggest one-month decline in the trade deficit since the financial crisis, the economic picture is not looking good. Bottom line, now is the time to own gold, which is why the experts at Stansberry Research just stepped forward with a major gold prediction, arguing gold could soar as high as $3,000 by the end of the year, possibly even higher. You can find out why and get instant access to their #1 gold investment today. It's not bullion, an ETF, or a mining stock, but in the past, this gold strategy could have made you nearly 50x your money. Considering how quickly the price of gold has been moving in recent weeks, you don't want to waste any time missing out on the gains these experts believe are in store for this gold stock. To get a copy of his new free report with all the details, simply go to goldmaniareport.com. Again, that's goldmaniareport.com for a free copy of his new report. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone. Welcome back to our summer series. Wow, what incredible guests we have lined up for you. And joining me today is the great George Gammon of the Rebel Capitalist. He is back. George, always good to be with you. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk.
Yes, I wanted to bring you on to talk U.S. debt, get your thoughts on that, the latest from the Fed. But I want everyone to stay tuned because we're going to talk about WorldCoin. And you might be thinking, what the heck is WorldCoin? Is it a central bank digital currency? Well,
it's actually worse.
To George,
it's worse.
Yes, I was going to say it's actually a complete nightmare situation. So we're going to get all the details on that from George today. But let's start with the current issue here in the not just issue. Let's start with the major issue here in the U.S. Debt level here. You might remember the May drama surrounding the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling from 31.4 trillion. But as we know, the ceiling was not raised. It was suspended until after the next election. But just last month, the debt soared past the $32 trillion mark, up from 31 trillion in only just 36 weeks. So we keep adding trillions to the equation. How do we get out of this mess, or don't we? Now, I bring this up, George, because I'm sure you saw the recent comments from Rubenstein of the Carlyle Group, who says, look, the only way out of debt is to inflate. Do you agree?
No, you could do a debt jubilee. I mean, I think that's pretty much where Japan is right now, because the only two balance sheets that are at play would be the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. Now, I'm not saying that's a good option, but it would be another option. But I have quite a bit different view on the national debt than most people, because most people see the debt as the real problem, and I don't. If you look at the interest rate right now in the 10-year Treasury as an example, it's hovering right around 3.8%. And as we speak, the Fed is in the process of increasing interest rates, let's say up to 5.25 to 5.5%. So you've got the 10-year Treasury trading way, way, way below Fed funds. Over the past year, the 1-month Treasury has traded up to 60 basis points under reverse repo, which is supposed to be the absolute floor on short-term rates set by the Federal Reserve. So there's a ton of demand out there for treasuries. I understand all the arguments that there's not enough balance sheet capacity and all these central banks are dumping treasuries, and you've got the BRICS currency and gold back, and there's not going to be demand for dollars, therefore there's not going to be demand for treasuries. I get all that. And that very well could play out in the future. But as of right now, there is significant demand for U.S. treasuries. I would say that's because of the global monetary system. And if you believe that we're going into a recession, then there's going to be even more demand for treasuries because there's more demand for dollars and more demand for collateral. But setting that aside, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a fan of government debt. But the problem isn't necessarily the debt itself, it's the government spending. So I always look at this similar to looking at like a heroin addict. And that if you have this heroin addict that you give them a credit card, let's say for $100,000, and then they run up this credit card, destroying their body, destroying their mind, destroying their soul even more, and then they max out the card, then all of a sudden you take away that card and you give them a brand new one. Let's say you give them a debt jubilee. So the problem really isn't the debt on the credit card. The problem is the spending that they have done has destroyed their entire being, and it might kill them. And it's the exact same thing, in my opinion, with an economy. Is the debt, Japan's a good example of this. That's not really the problem. They could do a debt jubilee, and I don't think it would impact their economy or the yen that much. But the problem isn't the debt. It's the fact that they spent, the government, they spent the money to accrue the debt to begin with. And we know that government spending is going to be very inefficient. It's going to misallocate resources. It's going to create malinvestment, and it's going to completely distort the economy. So that's your problem. It's the government spending. It isn't necessarily the debt.
What happens during a debt jubilee? Because it sounds so celebratory and joyful.
Yeah. Well,
like, I need to get,
yeah, I've
special,
actually given
special wardrobe.
Well, yeah, I guess for the heroin addict, it is time to celebrate because they can go out and get some more heroin. But for Japan, as an example, they've got about 60% of the government debt on the balance sheet of their central bank, the BOJ. So if you think about this, there are only two balance sheets involved in this equation. There's the central bank and the government. That's it. So if the central bank came in and one day just said, oh shoot, I spilled my coffee and accidentally hit the delete button, then all of that debt, it disappears. And the debt to GDP in Japan, let's say, goes from, I don't know what it is now, but let's just say it's 250%. It goes straight down to whatever, 100%, just instantly. And there's only two balance sheets that are involved in that equation. So the question becomes, as a thought experiment, let's just assume they did this for a moment, but they didn't announce it to the general public. How would people even know? How would the FX market know? How would it, because they wouldn't, is the answer, because it doesn't affect any other balance sheet. Now, I'm not, again, let me be very, very clear. I'm not arguing for a debt jubilee. I'm just saying how easy it would be, and that the problem, again, let me just reiterate, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I know people are going to take this the wrong way. I'm not saying debt doesn't matter and we should just rack up debt and yay MMT. I'm saying that the real issue with the US debt isn't necessarily that there's not demand for our debt or demand for treasuries, although that may be something in the future, but it definitely isn't happening now. The real problem is that we're allowing the government to spend that money to begin with. That is really what is causing the problem and all the economic distortions.
I hear you. So my question is, well, why wouldn't they just usher in a debt jubilee?
Well, I think that definitely an option if it's something that they get to that point. But right now, if we go back to 2020, right? Let's think about this for a moment. At the time, the United States debt, I don't know right off the top of my head, but it was probably $5 to $6 trillion less than it is right now, the United States debt. Okay. M2 money supply at that time was, call it 25% lower than it is today, just 3 years later. So you have had a massive expansion in the money supply domestically in the United States. You have had a massive blow up in the amount of debt that the United States now has on its balance sheet. But what has the dollar done in that time? It's pretty much gone from low 90s, and it peaked up at 112. Now it's down hovering around 100. Relatively speaking, I'm talking about the DXY, that's a pretty strong dollar. And during that time, and let's just go back for the last year, the Fed has raised rates from basically 0% all the way up to 5.5%. And in that time, the 10-year Treasury has only gone from wherever it was, let's say 1%, up to 3.8%, meaning that the Fed funds, the front end of the curve, has gone up way, 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 way more than that long end of the curve. And what that tells me is that there's a lot of demand, although you had the increase of money supply by 25%, although you have had an additional $5 to $6 trillion of debt just in the last 3 years placed on the federal balance sheet, it still hasn't impacted the amount of demand for that debt globally. And the reason is because, I know Americans have a hard time understanding this, but the demand, the U.S. Treasury is basically collateral for the entire global monetary system. the entire thing. So it's not just a matter of what is happening with the domestic economy in the United States, what is happening with the supply-demand dynamics there. There's a lot more to it at play, and you got to realize that the global economy is about $110 trillion of GDP, and 60 to 70% of those transactions are settled in the US dollar. So you've got to look at the dollar as two completely separate currencies, and you've got to look at treasuries as basically two completely separate bond markets in relationship to their supply-demand dynamics, one inside the United States and one outside of the United States.
This is probably a loaded question, but going to your point about the U.S. as collateral for the whole system, how did that become the case?
With the Eurodollar market going back to Bretton Woods in 1944. So what happened is 1944, as most of your viewers know, we had all the gold. So you try to peg the dollar to gold, and you say, okay, now the dollar is the world reserve currency. Well, that sets up a big problem for countries outside of the United States, especially since we weren't running deficits back then. So how do they even get the dollars they need to grow their economy on all 8 cylinders? So it presents a problem for not only these countries, but it presents an opportunity for all these banks that are outside the purview of the Federal Reserve, that don't have to play by their rules, that don't have reserve requirements, as an example. They can start to create dollars out of nothing. There's no bank reserves, there's no green pieces of paper, nothing. If you're an offshore bank in the 1950s, and there's a French company, let's say, that needs $1 billion loan, you can go ahead and create those dollars. It's not a problem. As long as these, and I won't go into the details, but as long as these banks are networked, they can basically provide credit to each other to go ahead and extend those loans. So you have this dollar system outside the United States that grows and grows and grows and grows to a point now, like I said, where there's probably $100 trillion on global balance sheets, $100 trillion, where 80% of those dollars were created in this system. And the interesting thing about that system is it requires treasuries in order to function. It's like the oil that lubricates the whole system. So again, I know a lot of your viewers probably expect us to go into a global recession. I know I do, especially if you're looking at the yield curve. The inversion of the curve is what I'm talking about specifically. So they believe that the global economy is headed for hard times, that there's storm clouds out there on the horizon. Well, if you believe that, if the global economy is struggling, then you also have to believe that the demand for those treasuries is going to increase. Because when you look at the Silicon Valley banks, when you look at the First Republic, when you look at the Credit Suisse, people know what I'm talking about. And by the way, there was another bank that almost blew up, PacWest. They had to be absorbed by Bank of California. I'm sure you guys were reporting on that at Stansberry. But the banking crisis is far from over. So the more this banking crisis plays out, the more we have these this economic turbulence globally. Unfortunately, whether people like it or not, it's going to create more demand for treasuries because they are the collateral that that global monetary system needs. And so, when and how that ends, I'm not sure, because it's almost impossible for the United States to, quote unquote, print enough money and get those dollars outside into the global economy through trade deficits in order to impact the supply-demand dynamics outside of the United States. Now, so where that leads us is to a very precarious position where it's almost like you have a Triffin's paradox, but instead of for the dollar, for treasuries. So does the United States want to continue to go further and further into debt, excuse me, to give the global monetary system the collateral it needs, while at the same time destroying their domestic economy because of this government spending? Or do they want to, tighten their belts, spend a lot less, and do what's right for the domestic economy, while at the same time collapsing the global economy? You get into this situation where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And unfortunately, that's the position the U.S. is in right now. And that's why I think my base case long-term over the 2020s is that the dollar stays relatively strong. I think it may go down to 80, 90, something like that. But I think there's actually more risk on the upside for up to 110, 120, while at the same time, you have significant inflation domestically in the United States. People forget that the dollar can go up against other currencies, while at the same time, inflation gets pretty high here in the United States. Inflation goes from 2% to 3% to up to 9%, while at the same time, the dollar can be appreciating in value against other currencies. And that's kind of what I see as my base case for the next maybe 3 to 5 years.
George, I would think they would choose whatever option that keeps their superpower status intact.
Yeah. Well, see, that's where you go back to the global banking system. And these are people that have made literally trillions of dollars on the United States being the world reserve currency since the 1950s. So when you talk about a BRICS currency that's backed by gold and all of these things, it is true that could decrease demand for dollars, but the dynamic that will be at play there, the war that will be waged, won't necessarily be between the United States and the BRICS countries. It'll be between the global banking system and the BRICS countries.
And the BRICS. Okay.
That's what people need to gamify.
Okay, and let's take it one step further before talking the BRICS again. What do you make? Let's say Robert Kennedy Jr. wins the next presidential election, and we have a return. You know, his premise is to have a dollar backed by Bitcoin and gold.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just play out that scenario. Well, first of all, what's the likelihood of it for you?
0. Now let me be clear, Danielle, because I absolutely love the fact that he's talking about it. I mean, let's think about this. In 2023, we have a presidential candidate, a Democrat, for heaven's sakes, presidential candidate that's actually thinking about the monetary system.
I agree.
That in and of itself is a huge win. And I can't disclose any names.
Yeah.
I can't disclose any names, but some of my very good friends in the macroeconomic space, people that you and your viewers know and respect, I know RFK has reached out to them and actually met with them personally to try to better understand things like Bitcoin, like the gold standard, and like the Eurodollar system that we were talking about before. So that in and of itself is fantastic. And I'm really, really excited to have someone that's a presidential candidate that's actually seeking out that type of knowledge. Now, that said, the kind of vague proposal that he laid out the other day to have 1% backing, I'm assuming when he's talking about backing, he's talking about that it would be redeemable. And if he, first of all, I don't think he could do it, but even if he did, it would last a day or something like that. Because if you want to back a currency, you can't back it 1%, or you're just going to, let's say it's Bitcoin. So then outside the United States, when the price of Bitcoin goes up, well, all they're going to do is it creates an arbitrage opportunity where they're just going to drain the treasury immediately. Because why would I buy Bitcoin outside the United States at 31,000 when I could just buy it from the treasury at 30,000? And so then the treasury has to give up all their Bitcoin or gold. And then you have this dynamic where they're just left in the exact same position and the peg almost immediately breaks. So from a standpoint of the plumbing or the mechanics, it's a no-go. It won't work. But again, I still think it's a big win that he's talking about it. I
agree with that. Taking one step further then, what did you make of remarks from BlackRock's Fink when he says, well, Bitcoin will be the currency basically of the future that will transcend all? I mean, is he just talking his future book here? Yeah,
he's a grifter. I mean, he is the quintessential grifter. He goes from ESG, so now all of a sudden that's not working out for him. So he's thinking about, okay, how do I increase my fees? How do I get more AUM? How can I just make more profit? And he's like, okay, I'll go from this grift over to this grift. And he's going from ESG, now he's going over to Bitcoin and trying to do something similar there. And if that doesn't work out for him, I can assure you he's going to go from Bitcoin to whatever else the new shiny object is that he thinks he can make money, and claiming that he has some sort of I'm not going to say he's claiming that he even has morals, but claiming that he has some sort of that this is his prediction, when in reality I don't think it's his prediction at all. He's just saying what he thinks people want to hear. I mean, for all I know, if the Bitcoin thing doesn't work out for him, he's going to move on to WorldCoin, and that will probably that'll probably be the new thing that he's creating an ETF around. Who knows?
Good point. Well, let's go there, because I want to thank you. See, this is why I love shows like yours and mine, and I say mine because I'm learning along with the audience.
Yeah.
where we get to learn about these news items that oftentimes go under the radar. So WorldCoin, it's an ambitious cryptocurrency and digital ID project being spearheaded by OpenAI chief Sam Altman.
Yeah.
Tell us about this terrifying, awful, horrific idea.
Yeah. But then because I'm going to forget, but remind me to tell you about the good news about this as well. I spoke with, I'm sure your friend, Simon Black. I'm very good friends with Simon Black with Sovereign Man. I'm sure your audience is very familiar with him.
Yes.
We spoke for about an hour on and off the record this morning, and he came up with some great points. So anyway, we'll circle back to that in a moment. So let's start off by Sam Altman. He is the CEO of OpenAI. In the past, he has been affiliated with the World Economic Forum. He is part of their young global leaders, I think is what they call it. And according to Klaus Schwab himself, he sees these 800 or so young World Economic Forum leaders as though he is grooming them, and these are his words, not mine, grooming them to solve the problems of the world and also to really run and control the world in the future. So if you don't like Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, you should have some hesitations. I'm not saying that you should completely throw him under the bus and not give him the benefit of the doubt, but you should have some hesitations immediately with Sam Altman. Also, he goes to these Bilderberg meetings that are held in secret. It's the Bilderberg group, or AKA, if you want to put on your tinfoil hat, you can go down that path. But the bottom line is these meetings have people like Henry Kissinger. I know the last one had the guy that runs the NATO, also the CEO of Pfizer. So, and one of the things that's interesting about these Bilderberg meetings is they have something called Chatham, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Chatham House Rules, which basically says that what goes on inside closed doors, you can't really talk about it. It's
right.
like,
so what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, basically.
Yeah. So Sam is also going to these. So now this brings us to his newest project, which is WorldCoin, which, by the way they sell this as though it's a way to protect your privacy and actually to distribute UBI because of the negative consequences that artificial intelligence may have in the future. So it's kind of a head scratcher because he's the guy that's really behind artificial intelligence, while at the same time his newest company is trying to solve the problems that artificial intelligence creates. It's like our good friend Jim Grant always says, it's like the arsonist and the firefighter being the exact same person. So that also gives me quite a bit of pause. But then when you get into the details of how you get this cryptocurrency, it goes from insane to absolutely frightening. And that's to say the least. So the way you get this cryptocurrency is you have to download the World app on your phone, and that tells you where the nearest orb is, ORB.
Okay.
And this is a piece of hardware that looks like they're setting up in malls, and it looks like something out of Minority Report. It's this silver type of orb, and it's got this thing sticking out. And what they do is they set it up on some sort of tripod or something at the local mall, and you get in line and you go down there and you look into the orb, and it scans your eyeball, it scans your iris, and it takes out, or it calculates or somehow gets your biometric data. And then with your biometric,
just like George, you mean just like Nexus? Global entry?
Oh, does it? I don't know. I don't use that stuff. I'm not a fan of that stuff at all. But
well, there you go. But anyhow.
So then it gives you this ID number that you can use to navigate the internet that basically says, that validates you as a human being and you're not some sort of bot. That's the idea behind it. Yes. And then what they say is that they take the biometric data and they just dispose of it. But they also say that they'll keep it if you want them to keep it. But then you're also having to take the word of a person that rubs elbows with Klaus Schwab, Henry Kissinger, the head of NATO, and the CEO of Pfizer. So I don't know about your audience, but me personally, I would prefer my biometric data not be in those types of hands. So then what happens is when you give them, you let them scan your eyeball, they give you this code or ID number on your phone, but then they also give you their cryptocurrency, which is called WLD. So then you get their cryptocurrency, and what they tell you is that in the future, once they start to monetize basically your biometric data, then they'll give you effectively dividends in the form of more cryptocurrency. And they're trying to do this with all 8 billion people on Earth. So they have UBI when the artificial intelligence that Sam is actually creating himself takes over the planet and destroys all the jobs. So that's the Reader's Digest version of it.
Okay, the first question that comes to mind is, who in their right mind would sign up for this? I mean, how would this entice me to do this? Why?
Free money, Danielle.
Free money. So is it preying on the weakest and the poorest in society?
Yeah. So right now, I think their cryptocurrency is illegal in the United States because it's seen as a security. So the only place, and by the way, they just launched this a couple days ago, and I know they've already gotten. Well, the first day they had 2 million people globally sign up for this.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually, they've got a promo video that people can find online. It's all over Twitter, where they actually show people in Buenos Aires and all these places where they've actually set up an orb in the local mall, and they show just lines of people. It's usually young people, lines of these people that are just sitting there waiting and just super, super excited to get their eyeball scanned by the orb so they can get their $25 or whatever worth of this cryptocurrency that they think in the future will be worth indefinite UBI. And so what's interesting and actually clever about it, in a very evil, genius type of way, is it's a lot like Groupon in the sense that these young people realize that in order to have the highest probability of receiving this UBI indefinitely into the future, they're going to need to get more and more of their friends to do it. So you've got the initial 2 million people, but then they have a financial incentive to go out and get all their friends to do it. And then their friends have a financial incentive to get all their friends to do it. So you create this network effect where, how many people are going to sign up for free money? If they just have to look into the orb. And you and I are horrified by that, rightfully so. You wouldn't, I don't think either of us would do that for all the money in the world.
No way.
We're very atypical, Daniela. We have to understand that the people that listen to Stansberry or the Rebel Capitalist show, we do not represent the overall majority of the people on the planet Earth. I mean, if you, especially, and it's not just $25, what you're doing is you're promising them basically a lottery ticket to where there's what they claim is a high probability that you're going to get UBI forever, Daniela. So here's the trade-off with a young person that doesn't care about privacy in any way, shape, or form to begin with. They've spent their whole life online giving their personal information to Mark Zuckerberg or whomever wants it. So the sales pitch for these people is all you got to do is look into the orb real quick, and then you immediately get $25. And if you get enough of your friends to do this, and we have enough people doing this globally, then not only can we distinguish you from a bot online, but we'll pay you universal basic income so you never have to work again when the robots take all the jobs.
You know what? You bring up a very interesting point, how the new generation does, just kind of gives up their privacy. It's like, has this been part of the master plan of just grooming them, the new population, of not having an issue with privacy for these exact moments? But I know that's a larger conversation, but it makes you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to that. I believe that one of our greatest assets is the incompetence of the bureaucracy of large governments. I would include large corporations in that, and institutions like the World Economic Forum and the UN or the EU or something like that. So I think it's one thing for them to have these types of objectives, and it's a whole other set of probabilities for them to bring them to fruition. But if we just look at their objectives, you're talking about grooming and doing all these other things, it's absolutely part of the plan. I mean, they'll come right out and say it. In fact, Klaus Schwab says that his Young Leaders program at the World Economic Forum is specifically to groom these people that will rule the planet over the next, let's say, 10, 20 years and further. So they're not hiding this. This is all out in the open. And if you look at their other objectives, I always call them the Marxist Malthusian cult, because if you scratch beneath the surface and actually read what they say, listen to what they say, and then look at their history, you see the whole World Economic Forum, most of the global elite right now, are just an offshoot of the Club of Rome that was set up in 1968. And their big thing was the limits to growth, this paper that came out, I believe, in 1972. And this is just straight out of Thomas Malthus's playbook. And Malthus believed that there are too many people on the planet Earth and not enough resources. And therefore, what we need to strive for is a planet with less people on it, with a lower population. And so this is what the global elites truly believe. They want fewer people on the planet. That is the absolute bottom line. So when you look at everything that they're pushing, whether it's trying to stoke the fire with Russia and Ukraine, you have to ask yourself, okay, if we have a nuclear war, is that going to create more people or less people? Well, if the answer is less people, then you have to scratch your head and say, I wonder if that's why they're trying to stoke the fire. Because it all goes back to what their original objective is, and that's to reduce the population on the planet Earth. So when it comes to these cryptocurrencies, or what they're doing with Sam Altman, or any of these other what I would consider useful idiots, I think you have to look at it through that lens.
So quickly there, George, what's the good news about it? What could possibly be the good news?
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like this dystopian sci-fi movie. I think one of our greatest weapons against the authoritarians, the central planners, and the people who want to implement this global tyranny is their own hubris. So if you go back to 2020 as an example, when they first came out with these mandates, if a guy or his wife or something like that, they have a job, like, okay, I'm not really into it. I'm not really paying attention, but I have to get a lot of other shots. So what's one more? Who cares? And I have to save my job. I got to, provide for my family. But when they crossed that line and started talking about their kids, that's when people, even kind of the normies, took a step back and said, whoa, time out. No, we're not playing this game. You can jab me all you want, but you're not going to jab my kid with something I don't know about, or that is unproven or hasn't been tested for more than, let's say, 6 months. So that's an example to me of the global elite and the authoritarians pushing it too far because they kind of get arrogant, and people pushing back because they realize what's happening. They're starting to see that the quiet part is being said out loud, so to speak. So I think it could be the same thing with this WorldCoin, and from the standpoint of, in order to do this, now all of a sudden you've got this hardware, and you have to go down to a mall, and it looks super, super creepy. And you've got to scan your eyeball. There's this red beam coming out. But what people don't realize is Facebook, social media, the government, the NSA, they've been collecting this data on you for the last 2 decades, for heaven's sakes. And people have been very nonchalant about it. So I'm actually, in a way, kind of optimistic that this silver orb will make people wake up to the fact that we shouldn't just push back against WorldCoin, but we should push back against the NSA. We should be pushing back against Facebook. We should be pushing back against Apple and all these other companies that are trying to use facial recognition and biometric data.
George, I'm happy I asked you what the good part was about that. Thank you for the explanation. And as we wrap our summer series now, I want to know about your summer, but I also want to get your thoughts, some quick thoughts on FedNow. It's officially launched. Has it changed life in any way?
Well, FedNow is just simply back-end plumbing. So it's not a CBDC.
Yes.
The main point of a CBDC is that your dollar assets, instead of being a liability of a commercial bank like Wells Fargo, are now a liability of the Federal Reserve. But what this does is it sets the stage to where they could flip that switch pretty quick. So they have FedWire right now, which allows banks to settle between one another daily. And it's real-time, I think, gross settlement. They have an acronym for it, if I'm not mistaken. But that's where JP Morgan wants to send $1 billion to Wells Fargo. They can just do that on the Fed's balance sheet. They do it through something called FedWire. Most of the time, I think they've got options there, but usually FedWire. The problem with FedWire is it's not set up for retail transactions. It's not set up for billions of transactions per day. and FedNow is. So instead of going through an alternative source, a third party that's owned in the private sector like CHIPS, which would be a clearinghouse and a messaging system, now they can just go directly through the Fed. Now, so what's the problem there? Well, if you're going through CHIPS, what they do is they net out all the transactions. So the only thing that the reserve banks know is that at the end of the day, Wells Fargo is paying Bank of America, let's say $100, right? If that's what it nets out to. The problem with running everything through FedNow is they're going to have the real-time data of each party on both sides. Not just the bank, but most likely the individual as well. And even if they don't now, it's something that in the future, if they do roll out a CBDC, then they've got all of the infrastructure, let's say, to make sure that they can handle all these payments running through the Fed's balance sheet. So that's really what to be careful with. And that's really what I think FedNow is all about.
He always leaves me speechless. George Gammon, I absolutely love speaking with you. 45 minutes just goes by so fast with you. Come back soon. Are you enjoying your summer so far?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm in Medellin, Colombia, and the weather doesn't change here. So for me, it's like
summer
a
always.
beautiful spring day every single day of the year. It's great. It's fantastic.
Fantastic. Well, come back soon, George. I'll see you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We hope you're enjoying our summer series. Things are just getting heated here on the Daniela Camboni Show. We'll have more incredible content coming your way, so be sure to stay tuned and sign up at danielacamboni.com.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.